Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, known as Lenin, was born in the Volga River town of Simbirsk on April 22nd, 1870, just pretty much the same year that Germany began, more than 400 miles east of Moscow. His father served as the director of primary schools for the province, and as a result of loyal service, he obtained non-hereditary membership in the nobility. Lenin's mother, whose family had originally been German, was the daughter of a doctor. Older brother Alexander, who joined the revolutionary group People's Will, was executed in 1887 for participation in a plot to kill Tsar Alexander III. Lenin briefly attended university, but was expelled for participating in a student demonstration. During the next 6 years, Lenin read widely in history and philosophy, including the works of Marx and Friedrich Engels, and received a degree in law from the University of St. Petersburg. In 1895, Lenin went to Austria, France, and Switzerland, meeting Russian political exiles and socialists from many countries. Back in St. Petersburg 2 years later, he was charged with organizing and writing articles in a clandestine newspaper, Iskra or Spark, and exiled to Siberia. When his term of banishment ended in 1900, he moved to Switzerland. As a virtually penniless exile, he bore his situation with good humor. Lenin's few interests outside of politics and revolution included chess, hunting, bicycling, and mountain hiking, but he viewed most recreational activities, even at times simple conversation, as interfering with a revolutionary struggle. There was nothing about Lenin's appearance that would have attracted the attention of Tsarist spies or Swiss and French police. An Englishman said that he looked more like a provincial grocer than a leader. Lenin combined a powerful ability to theorize with a facility for adapting to changing circumstances. His steely resolve would carry him to cold fury when colleagues or rivals failed to agree with him. "He who does not understand this does not understand anything," was a typical Lenin rejoinder. A vigorous polemicist, he could be impatient and churlish in speech, cutting and sarcastic with his potent pen. In 1902, Lenin, who had taken his name as a pseudonym the previous year, published What is to be Done? In this pamphlet, with the same title as the work by Chernyshevsky, Lenin established what would become the basic tenets of a new revolutionary party. Lenin believed that Marxist analysis could be applied to a backward authoritarian nation with a relatively underdeveloped working class and a small bourgeoisie. The one serious organizational principle for workers in our movement must be strictest secrecy, he wrote, and the strictest choice of members and the training of professional revolutionaries. He rejected all compromise with liberals and reform socialists, viewing as self-defeating the struggle of workers for small economic gains, crumbs tossed from the posh table of the ruling class. And this would be true when he returned to Russia in 1917 and refused to work with provisional government. Rejecting the common Marxist view that the social experiences of workers would lead them to revolutionary consciousness, Lenin believed that only a minority of workers could achieve consciousness and that these should join with intellectuals in a party that would direct the masses. Lenin and his followers became known as the Bolsheviks, or majority, although much of the time in the years that followed they were not. And their rivals were known as the Mensheviks, the minority. The Mensheviks believed that the proletarian revolution lay in the future, but not until a bourgeois uprising had first succeeded in overwhelming the Tsarist state. Mensheviks believed that their role was to mobilize support for their party through propaganda while undertaking timely alliances with liberal groups. They objected to the high degree of party centralization upon which Lenin insisted. Now, events in 1904 would provide an opportunity for these revolutionaries. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. In the meantime, the Russian Empire lurched toward war with Japan. It had begun with covert Chinese Manchuria. It had begun to covet Chinese Manchuria and the peninsula of Korea. The acquisitions of Manchuria would permit Russia to construct a more direct rail link to the ice-free Russian port of Vladivostok. That of Korea would protect the new port from possible attack and provide still more ports. In 1894, Japan goaded China into a war. By the Treaty of Shimonoseki, 1895, the victorious Japanese took the island of Formosa, today's Taiwan, and gained Chinese recognition of Korea's independence. This placed the peninsula under direct Japanese influence. Japan also acquired the Liaodong Peninsula in southern Manchuria, but was forced by Russia, Germany, and France to return it. Russia viewed the expansion of Japanese interests in the Far East with concern. In 1898, Tsar Nicholas II, who would rule from 1894 to 1917, signed a treaty with China and obtained a concession to build the Manchurian Railway and to construct a port at Port Arthur on the tip of the Liaodong Peninsula, providing a source of conflict between Japan and Russia. Japan, in turn, signed a treaty in 1902 with Great Britain, Russia's rival for influence in Afghanistan. Britain would remain neutral if Japan and Russia went to war against each other, but Britain would join Japan in any conflict that allied Russia with any other power in a war against Japan. In February 1904, Japanese torpedo boats launched a surprise attack on the Russian fleet in Port Arthur, destroying a number of ships while the Japanese army drove Russian forces away on land. In March 1905, Japanese troops defeated the Russians in the bloody Battle of Mukden, where for the first time two armies faced each other across trenches dug for protection. 2 months later, the Japanese Navy pounced on a second Russian fleet, which had spent 9 months at sea, coming all the way from the area of St. Petersburg. The Battle of Tsushima ended with 19 Russian ships sunk, 5 captured, and 6 forced to neutral ports. Only 3 ships of the Russian fleet reached Vladivostok. How could the Russian Empire be defeated by a small island nation in Asia? Only a single-track railway line stretched across thousands of miles which supplied the Russian forces. The Russian army was also poorly commanded and fought with outdated artillery and rifles. By the Treaty of Portsmouth, signed in September 1905 at a conference hastily arranged by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, Japan took over Russia's lease of the Liaodong Peninsula and the Chinese concession of Manchuria. Russia accepted Japanese influence over Korea. A new world imperial power was born in Japan. However, events in Russia were much more serious for the Russians. The Russian Revolution of 1905. Many of the Tsar's subjects had blamed government inaction for the murderous famine of 1891 to 1892, which had captured world attention. In 1902, peasants attacked noble property in some districts, and a wave of industrial strikes followed the next year in the factories. Liberals organized support for political reform by sponsoring banquets similar to those employed by French Republicans just before the Revolution of 1848. Dissent mounted against the forced Russification among subject nationalities, most notably the Poles and the Finns. Marxist groups were particularly active in Poland, where the issue of Polish nationalism versus internationalism was hotly debated. And in the Jewish Pale, those provinces where Jews were allowed to settle and where they faced endemic and anti-Semitism and occasional bloody pogroms. Shocking defeats in the distant Russo-Japanese War increased calls for liberal reform. A wide-ranging social and political alliance for change extended across the classes. For the first time, liberals and socialists, except the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, the gentry, the intellectuals, the professionals, and the workers, both Russians and non-Russians, came together in common opposition to autocracy, embracing a loose ideology of reform. After the assassination of his Minister of the Interior in July 1904 by socialist revolutionary, Nicholas II, the new Tsar now, had appointed a more moderate successor in the hope of calming dissent. Moreover, the Tsar allowed for a national congress of Zemstavas and Dumas to take place. It called for the establishment of a nationalist parliament. End.